Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be one of the videos about Italian grammar, and yes, we are in for a treat. For those of you who don't know, I am Irene and I am a language tutor from Italy. And today we are going to be talking about the basics of Italian verbs. Before we go ahead though, let me know that you find these videos useful by leaving a like and subscribing so that I can continue providing you with easy to understand, valid information about Italian. But let's get to the good stuff. Starting from the beginning though, the verb is a part of speech that indicates an action. So far we have talked about nouns that oftentimes represent the subject, the one doing the action of a sentence, but the subject in Italian can be omitted, if not strictly necessary, of course, because the verbs do the work for it. The verbs in Italian are conjugated, which means they have a form for each person. So you, I, she, he, etc. I don't know why I put them in the wrong order, but you get the gist of it. So every person has a different form. The form differs just slightly through suffixes, so it's not a huge difference, but the verb can stand alone. The conjugation, so the different forms, is what can make verbs a little bit complicated to learn because you have to kind of learn them by heart. There are more suffixes to distinguish, more forms to remember, and therefore the likelihood of making mistakes is higher. But if I haven't scared you off already, hear me out. The conjugation, as in most languages, can be quite regular. So once you understand the logic behind it and the mechanism of how it works, you can apply that to most verbs. There are irregular verbs though, I cannot deny that. But most of the verbs are regular, so you'll be good. That being said, we need to know a few things before going into the conjugation of a verb. All verbs have two things: moods and tenses. What are moods and what are tenses? Think about the mood as the way an action is presented. An action is interpreted in a way. Is the action a fact? Is it an hypothesis? Is it an order? That's what the mood determines. The tense instead places the action on the time axis. So is it present? Is it a present action? Is it a past action? Or is it a future action? So before I unveil the mystery of the conjugation, I am just gonna quickly run through the moods of Italian verbs so that when I say indicative, you know what I'm talking about. And then we'll go into what we're all waiting for, right? So in Italian, there are 7 possible moods. The finite and the indefinite moods, or definite and indefinite. Actually, I couldn't find one answer to this, but in Italian they're called finiti and indefiniti. The moods that are called finiti are the ones that actually conjugate the verb, which means each form of the verb is different depending on the suffix. While the verbs that are called indefiniti do not conjugate the verb. So they only have one form, which makes them, of course, easier. So thank God for those. The moods that are called finiti are the indicative, which is the one we are going to be focusing on the most at the beginning. The mood that presents an action as a fact. That in Italian is called indicativo. Then we have the subjunctive, the congiuntivo in Italian, the conditional or condizionale, and the imperative or imperativo. The indefinite moods, on the other hand, are the infinite, infinito, the participle or participio, and the gerund or gerundio. But all of this information, I know, it's a lot. We're going to be talking about this. We're going to be breaking everything down in small digestible bits so we don't get too confused now. But it was important for me to set the base from which to start talking about one specific mood. As I said, each mood has several different tenses or times, but we're only going to be focusing on the present tense for today. So today's main focus is the indicative present. It's probably the easiest, one of the most common forms, used to talk about things that you do in general, maybe also for your programs, your plans for the very near future, for like tomorrow, for later today at, I don't know, 2 p.m., and so on and so forth. So it's a tense that you do use in your everyday life quite often. When we are conjugating a verb, we have to take into consideration which group it belongs to. So there are three main groups, and you can distinguish them by the suffix of the infinitive. That can be are, first group, ere, second group, and ire, third group. Respectively, I would say that the are group, so first group, is the biggest and ire is the smallest. The difference between these three groups of regular verbs is what I like to call the dominant vowel, which is the vowel that you will find most often during the conjugation of the verb. So in the conjugation of the are group, the dominant vowel is a or a. The conjugation of ere group, the dominant vowel is I or e in Italian. And in the conjugation of the third group, so ire, the dominant vowel is I or I in Italian. Let's take three regular verbs as an example. To conjugate the verb, what you have to do is substituting to the suffix are, ere, or ire, depending, of course, the infinitive, with the personal suffixes. As we can see, there are many similarities between the three groups, are, ere, and ire. The first thing that we can see is the first person singular always ends in o, and this is the case for many other tenses of the indicative. The second person singular always ends in I, so I. Then one thing we can notice is that the third person singular ends in a for the first group and in e for the second and third group. Then the first person plural always ends in amo or iamo for the three groups, and at the second person plural, the only difference is the dominant vowel at the very beginning of the suffix. As for the third person plural, we have ano at the first group, ono and ono at the second and third group. Alright, so these were some examples of regular verbs, alright? But let's take into consideration a few irregular verbs. We have essere and avere, to be and to have. They are probably the most irregular verbs out there, and that's because they are the most used verbs. So why are the two things connected, or are they connected at all? Well, the thing is, the more a verb or any word really is common and commonly used, the more likely it is to get modified in or throughout history. And since to be and to have are among the most common verbs in every language, they are also the most irregular in basically every language. Think of English. Most verbs only have two forms, really. I eat, he or she eats, and these are the only two possible forms. So here are the conjugations of the verb essere and avere, to be and to have. So you will have sono, sei, è, siamo, siete, sono for the verb to be, essere. Then we'll have ho, hai, ha, abbiamo, avete, hanno. The H's are not pronounced. One thing we need to know is the essere and avere are said to have their own conjugation. However, they have some regularities. They have the O's at the first person singular, the I's at the second person singular. The third person singular is always very irregular. But then you go back to the regularity of siamo and abbiamo, iamo, iamo, and siete and avete. It's always very regular. The third person plural is still pretty irregular. We will see here third person singular, e and a, sono and hanno is very irregular. However, the first person singular and the third person plural are the same in essere. Finally, I would like to consider three irregular verbs. As you can notice, these are also high-frequency verbs. Fare, to do, volere, to want, and andare, to go. And oftentimes this irregularity expresses itself as the change of the root of the verb, really. But let's see how they are conjugated. Here you have the conjugations of fare, andare, and volere, to do, to go, and to have. And I'm highlighting the regularities of the conjugation that we've seen so far. The O of faccio, vado, voglio, the I of fai, vai, vuoi, and the dominant vowel that ends up being the suffix of fa, va, and vuole. The first person plural is still very regular. As we can see, facciamo, andiamo, and vogliamo all have the exact same suffix. It's regular when it comes to the suffix, not the root, not necessarily. Also, second person plural ends up being pretty regular too, in fate, andate, and volete. And the third person plural is the one that changes the most among the plural forms. What we can notice here, especially in the verb andare, is that the most regular forms end up being the first and second person plural, while the other ones usually are more irregular. We will see this pattern a lot throughout the irregular conjugations. And here you have it, the basics of the conjugation of the Italian verb of the present indicative. Now that you know this, you'll be able to have basic conversations about your everyday life, maybe your habits, your plans about the near future, and so on and so forth. You might have noticed that we didn't introduce the personal pronouns for the subject, and that's because they're going to be the subject of our next video, so I can dedicate a little bit more time to them. So I encourage you to stay tuned for that. Well, that was a lot, I know. If you're still around, please let me know by leaving a comment. I really hope that you found this video useful, that you learned something today. Of course, the verbs are one of the main parts of every language, and in Italian there is a lot to know about that. So this is going to be just the first video of a long series about verbs. So if you feel like you don't know enough, it's okay. We are going to be talking about it. Just stay tuned for my next video, so subscribe and click that little bell so you get a notification every time I post another video. And that being said, I am going to let you go. As always, it was a pleasure, and until next time, take care. Thank you so much for being here and spending some time with me, and I will see you in my next one.